My name is Olivier Stockman, and jointly with Christine Edzard, I run this place. Sands Film is a film studio, it's a working film studio. We are a series of workshop and stage and production facilities where people come and have their film service, where we make their costumes and help the filming and the stage. There's a facility for people to record and do filming. Anyway, that's what we do, and that's why we go to cinema. And then 10 years ago, we felt that the urge to revive the old tradition, if you like, of the film club, which is fundamentally a place where people have the opportunity to watch film in a group, have the opportunity to look at them not for commercial reason, but for educational and cultural reason. I look at the film to try and understand why, when it was made, and try to understand why it was made the way it was made, and try to explore things that goes around the process of making film and so on and so forth. So that's the purpose, obviously, of film societies, and that's we felt it would be necessary to do it again, because we live in an age where there is a surfeit of audiovisual material, but actually very little in for the purpose of actually trying to understand what this audiovisual material come from and where it's going in a way. So. And ironically, in the 60s, when it was much more difficult to watch films, you had many more film societies or people who would commit their lives to carrying 16mm projectors around to show art house films in the canteen of colleges. And now that is so easy, every room in a college virtually has a video projectors. And yet we don't, we meet hundreds of people who've never seen a classic, never seen a silent film, never seen a black and white film, and so on. It's quite extraordinary. One thing I want to say, and I think this is very, very interesting, is that in the context of cinema and cinema history, is that cinema is a very young art form. It was invented at the end of the 19th century. It's hardly, as we know it, so 100 odd years old. One of the characteristics as an art form is that it has a very, very, very ambiguous and, how can I say, dirty relationship with money. Is that fundamentally there are hardly any films ever being made unless there is a money transaction at one end or the other of the process. In other words, if there is not enough money, the film doesn't get made, or if it doesn't make money, there is always a kind of money. It's one of the art forms that has been completely monetized from the beginning. And when cinema was invented, at the beginning, when it was expanding in the West, in France, Germany, and then eventually in America and all those things, the relationship between the form of the film, the format, how it's delivered to the audience, the idea of a theatre and your antenna, and how to make the money were closely linked. The two things were really very integrated, and in fact it never or very seldom strayed from one another. Now, unless there was a process by which to get the money to show you the film, that wouldn't happen, and therefore the way the film is made is vastly influenced by how you're going to get the money. And if you feel you're making a film that you're not going to make money, the film doesn't get made. And this became the way, and to this day, I'd like to point out that there is hardly any amount of audiovisual material that is being dished out to you, the audience, unless that monetizing relationship continues to exist, because you think maybe you see a free film or a free piece of YouTube or free or something, but it isn't free. Somehow, somewhere, a money transaction has taken place for this to happen. Somebody is paid advertising time, somebody is paid something, there is a reason, there is a commercial reason at the back that allows for it to be dished out to you, because there is a payoff somewhere. And that, if you compare that in terms of art form to poetry or painting, this in poetry, how many poems have been written only because there is a money relationship between the writer and the reader? Hardly any. So it's almost a reverse situation. And when it comes to painting, there is a longer history of the commercialization of painting, obviously portraitures and commissions and so on and so forth. But on the whole, the art has remained an individualistic endeavor, and therefore a lot of painters just painting because they want to paint and they feel like it and they hope that they'll find someone who likes it. Why this film is so interesting is that it somehow, this tradition of those Russian and Soviet filmmakers who are making films for the love of film and for the love of film language has not died, and it has been kept by a number of filmmakers during the 60s and 70s, 80s. I mean, you know, I don't need to name them, you know there's been the Soviet schools and Russian schools of cinema, and it's still alive now. This film is an embodiment of that. It's a belief that the format, which is ultimately only a simple documentary, can be something else than just a factual succession of things, with figures, with things, and just, you know. This is a kind of poem. It's when I first watched that, I was amazed about the way the making of this was made, had been approached or conceived. It's a film. It's a piece of art using original and very moving material because they are genuine, because they are real. They're not actor pretending. The people who die on there, the dead people, are not faking it. They are real. It's very, very, very true. What we're going to see. The suffering is real. It's a real document. But the way it's being put together is not only respectful and very touching about what's happened, but it's the way that it lets time develop. It shows you things which in normal documentary, in a rational, efficient filmmaking, you wouldn't show. You'd cut the end of the take, you'd just trim it out. And cinema was, at least for the very beginning, perceived in a completely different light. It was a new art form. It was the art form that was not, which was new, was clean. It hadn't been made by lots of generation of bourgeois people putting in layers of their culture and layers of their tradition and layers of their power and their ancestral whatever superiority over the other classes and so on and so forth. It was a new art form that was associated with the new world that the Soviets were trying to build, and it was associated with this new industrial future which was going to be better for all of us. And that meant that a lot of the film directors, who were young guys of 20, 25 at the time, explored the film language in completely different ways. And it so happened that because it was in the midst of the Soviet Revolution, the money issue wasn't put to them in the same way. They were allowed to look at the experimental aspect of editing. They were experimental, they trying to understand how it works and why it works and the reason of making it work in a different context than how efficient is it to trigger fear, which will, for instance, the thrill of a pursuit or the thrill of something. They were put in a situation of how to put a message, how to put an emotion, what is important about communicating with a vast country with lots of ethnic languages and so on, how to express your identity, local identity within the Soviet context and all those things. Those were the things they were dealing with, which was much more intellectually and artistically pleasing, which is why the early Soviet cinema is such a golden era of people being much freer with what they're doing.